Culturally speaking, apologies are an acknowledgement of an offence or failure. While there is an implication of change in the recognition of that failure, not all people will mean or do that. It is important to determine what someone else means when they apologise, because their actions may not follow our expectations. To err is human, and when we err, we should apologise if that error leads to harm. But ambiguities about apologies can open us up to abuse, which can lead to further hesitation in apologising in the future. We don't need to be ambiguous, and we will cover how to avoid being taken advantage of later. Welcome to Joshua Davidson Therapy. I am Joshua. A bit of history and framing. Words affect culture, and culture redefines words. The origins of the word sorry come from the same origin as the word sore, as in to be in pain. Essentially, when our ancestors said, "I am sorry," they were saying, "I feel your pain." While that may be the origin, this is not how everyone uses it now. The driving forces for these differences revolve around empathy, responsibility, and social constructs of both empathy and responsibility. Empathy. Empathy is the ability to feel what another person is going through, either directly or indirectly. Direct empathy feels like a physical or emotional reaction within yourself. And indirect empathy is where manual cognitive connection of what the person is likely to be feeling drives a recall of a time in your life that you probably felt that same way. And using this memory or extrapolation of that memory indicates what to do next. Empathy is used to help us work out what we should do to help another. When we can't empathize with another person's experience, but we can still perceive their pain, we use the word sympathy instead. Remember, folks, while indirect empathy isn't as quick as direct empathy, it is still better than no empathy. Empathic people will often feel sorry for someone else's plight and feel a drive to do something to help, whether wanted, warranted, or not. The challenge for empathetic people is to balance supporting the other person while not undermining that reasonable person's ability to grow or enabling an abuser to abuse. People who don't have empathy will frequently find themselves calculating whether or not they need to be seen to be taking actions. The challenge for unempathetic people is acting within the cultural norms without looking cold and callous. Responsibility. Responsibility is the recognition of your part in the event. You might have no part in the harm done, some shared part of that harm done, or total blame for the harm done. This may inform you of whether to take part in the solution of the problem and perhaps make changes to how you would approach a situation in the future or not. Someone's claim of your responsibility may or may not be accurate, so be cautious in your evaluation and don't just take people's word for it, especially if that person has a history of misrepresenting things, harm of some others, or signs of being toxic. Social constructs. We live in various societies which all have various cultural and subcultural norms. Some cultures promote high levels of action to someone else's hardship as a norm, while other cultures promote no interference. And of course, many cultures in between. The culture you come from, or the subculture you come from, combined with the experiences that you have had, will affect the decisions about what you feel are appropriate levels of action to take. They will also affect the other person's expectations of what they will do, what they expect you to do, and neither of these may match what your expectations are because of a difference in culture. Receiving an apology. The crux of looking at how empathy, responsibility, and social constructs come into play are that someone who expresses an apology to you may understand your experience, or they may not. They may feel responsible for their part of your experience, or they may not. And they may make changes to avoid repeats of your experience, or they may not. It is important that after hearing their words of apology, not to assume which version of each of these they mean. Words are cheap, actions are where it's really at. So look at what they do after they say sorry or apologize in some other form. Also, be aware of the not apology. This is a classic move from politicians. When they say something along the lines of, "I'm sorry you feel like that," they are not actually empathizing with you. They do not take responsibility for what they have done, and they won't make changes to address the problem. They are following a cultural script that requires them to say something, while they feel no motivation to actually make any policy or personal change. The summary of all this is that when someone says to you, "I'm sorry," be careful of assuming their actions and motives based on this phrase. Instead, judge them on what they actually do after their apology. Our actions. While it is good to be cautious of what another person may mean when they say, "I'm sorry," we can't actually hold them to our own standards. We can, however, choose what we say and how we choose to act. We can be the change we want to see. To avoid being ambiguous to others, I recommend avoiding saying the words, "I'm sorry." Instead, try these. "I sympathize with your situation," or "That seems awful." This indicates that you are aware of their situation. "I empathize with that." Indicates that you feel for them. "What can I do to help?" Indicates that you're willing to support them in a solution. But the emphasis here is to support their actions, not fix it for them. "I can see that I have messed up, and that has affected you." Indicates your recognition of the consequences of your choice. By combining these clear statements, you can say what you actually mean. For example, "I empathize with that. I can see that I've messed up, and that's affected you. What can I do to help?" Feel free to vary the language so you don't sound either like a robot or that you're reading a script. Some people do need to hear the words "I'm sorry," and you can add that to this combination. They need to hear the words "I'm sorry" as their cultural script requires it for them to think that you are sincere. This avoids us using the simple and ambiguous statement of "I'm sorry" as a catch-all phrase. Apologies. I propose that the point of an apology is not actually to appease someone else. Rather, it is to recognize and acknowledge our part in something that went wrong and to grow from that. Using this fundamental idea changes the emphasis of an apology from seeking forgiveness to informing the other person of our growth. An apology is warranted when we recognize that our actions have impacted another person negatively. That is, there is some kind of harm, whether physical, cognitive, emotional, social, financial, and so on, that our action has triggered. There are 4 parts to this kind of an apology. Step 1, owning our error. Step 2, acknowledgement of harm. Step 3, amends. Step 4, growth. We'll go through each of these in a bit more detail. Step 1, owning our error. It is important to fact check that harm actually has occurred, as some people are not as honest as we would like. This must be done delicately and with diplomacy. Once harm has been noted though, acknowledge that you made an error. Name and define it when you can. Step 2, acknowledgement of harm. When we acknowledge to the offended person our mistake, we need to specify that we recognize that harm has occurred and how we understand it. They may then correct us on that level of consequence. Either down, "It wasn't that bad. Don't worry about it," or "I think you're overreacting. It wasn't that fun, but it wasn't that bad either." They could also change the level upwards. "I don't think you get how much what you have done has affected me," or "You just don't seem to get it." When the offended person decreases the level of impact that you have guessed, take their word for it. It is fair to be a bit concerned if they always downplay the effects on them. It could be that they have learned to avoid recognizing harm to themselves or acknowledging it, or that your estimation of harm that you do may be way out of proportion and need adjusting. When the offended person increases the level of impact that you thought it had on them, it is important to listen to them to understand why they felt it was worse than you estimated. This is your opportunity to learn from them. A sincere attempt to learn will almost always be welcome. However, sometimes it is important to do your own research because this is a very touchy or well-known topic. If you're not sure and you are lost, ask for some key terms for you to look up, to research on your own time. It isn't their job to educate you. It is important to be cautious of the person who falsely claims greater harm than is reasonable. This becomes obvious when the claim of harm is too high or the explanation for why it is high does not make sense, especially when you reality check that explanation with others. They either don't understand or have to go to complex lengths to make it seem kind of okay. Other common phrases to watch out for as red flags are, "you should know," or "if you don't understand by now," especially if this entire line of problem is new to you. How are you supposed to know? You do not have to accept unjust elevations of harm. The offended person may be either taking your error out of context or is adding it to an unknown to you history of pain, or is misrepresenting your actions as more harmful so that you will feel an ongoing obligation to them. Step 3. Amends. It is important to offer amends to those whom we have harmed. This could be as simple as the acknowledgement statement, "I made a mistake," or may include actions or resources as compensation. The amends should match the level of your share of the problem of the action that has caused them harm. If they accept your amends, then once you have done the amends action, that is the end of your amends responsibility. Sometimes the offended person will refuse amends. This is their choice, but they can no longer hold it over you in the future, for they have refused. The offended person can negotiate for a different form of amends or level of amends, but it should not be something you are unwilling to do or too much more than you have offered. If it is, then assessment and reality checking, especially with others, first is warranted. If they insist on something that is unreasonable, you can refuse. This often results in the offended person feeling dissatisfied, but limits of responsibility are important. Your offer of amends is a peace offering, and some people don't choose peace. Step 4. Personal growth. Remember that to become an expert in anything requires making mistakes and learning from them. Making mistakes is human. Sometimes our errors are mere misunderstandings or miscalculations, and learning more is enough to change our future actions and assumptions. Sometimes our errors expose a fundamental problem with ourselves, and we need to make some pretty intense changes. That may include collaborating with others, researching into topics we were ignorant about, or therapy. Some changes are hard. Once we have started our change journey, we have grown beyond the person who made that old error. There will be times we are tested and tempted to go back to old patterns. When we notice ourselves in an old pattern, pause and evaluate before continuing. It is the choices we make that define us. What are you choosing? Sometimes those whom we have harmed with our errors in the past will come seeking more compensation or will not see that we have grown. This is their problem. Following this process as I've outlined, past you has done your amends and present you owes them nothing more other than consideration and patience. If the offended person can't see your growth and can't let the past go, that tells you about them. Try to be patient and help them grow too. However, it is important to recognize a limit. You can't make them grow if they don't want to, and you can't prove to them that you have grown if they refuse to see it. Feeling a responsibility for someone else's harm, when accurate, helps you to grow. Analysing what went wrong and how you can improve that will lead to self-development and personal growth. However, if you are inaccurate in your level of responsibility, either because your self-assessment is out or you've been misinformed by others, then changes to yourself will be error-driven and lead to possible behavioural grooming by an abuser or maladaptive behaviours that can lead to erratic-looking behaviour. That's why it's important to do reality checking and research. Thank you for your time.